Today on the podcast, we're joined by Alistair Brownlee, double Olympic triathlon champion, to talk about his incredible career and the unbelievable mental discipline that got him right to the top of athletics. It's his first in-depth interview following the announcement of his retirement. Alistair is the only athlete in history to hold 2 Olympic titles in the individual triathlon event, having won gold medals in both the London 2012 and the 2016 Olympics. He's also a 4-time world champion. Famously, his younger brother Jonny is also a decorated triathlete. The Brownlee brothers were considered the dominant male Olympic distance triathletes of the 2010s, often competing together and against each other. In 2016, Alistair spotted his brother suffering from exhaustion and pushed him across the line of a World Series event that Alistair had been on track to win. Alistair Brownlee is widely regarded as one of the greatest male athletes ever to have lived. Today, he's building a new chapter to his career across a range of ventures, building on the decades of experience he has at the top of sports. We're really lucky to count Alistair as an investor in Giants Fund. In this conversation, we talk about why relying on willpower is a recipe for failure, what you can learn from elite athletes, nature versus nurture for excellence, and the characteristics that define Olympic champions and top founders. Alistair, thank you for joining the Giant Ideas podcast. It's great to have you with us. Take us inside the life of a double Olympic champion. What are the levels of sacrifice that you had to make?
Firstly, I never viewed it as sacrificing, otherwise it would have been a kind of a nightmare career of constant sacrifices. I always thought I was making choices to maximize my athletic performance and achieve the goals. It might be a small difference, but an important one. And in terms of the actual routine, I swam 5 days a week, always in the morning at 7 or 8 o'clock. I'd normally ride my bike after that or run. Every day was slightly different, but in total it would be 35 plus hours of training a week, plus time in the gym, massage, physio, split across swim, bike, run. Could be 6 hours of swim, 15, 20 hours of cycling, and somewhere between 8 and 12 hours of running at most. And really, you're training to train and train more. So training 50 weeks of the year, really to try and specifically train hard for 6 weeks up to a big event.
Unreal. So, all athletes have to have discipline, right? Of course, but triathlon is a pretty serious event. And I've read in the past you talking about there were times when you got to serious levels of exhaustion when you're competing and, your temperature's rising and you're worried you're going to die at some point.
Yeah, well, it sounds cliche, but you are pushing yourself to your physical limits for the only reason to try and beat some other bloke pushing himself to his physical limits. And at the top level, margins are small, and everyone's to some extent near to the limits. And maybe if you can just push that a little bit closer, that means that you're going to win on that day. And that's why you see in endurance sport people for some reason getting to their limits, whether that's kind of cardiovascular, pushing too hard, going over the red line, whether that's temperature, body temperature. And that's what's happened. It's happened to me and to Jonny in the famous case where your body temperature goes past a set mark and you basically just cut out at that point. So yeah, I think it's happened to most endurance athletes.
So I want to talk about, for our audience, willpower. And you obviously have had to use willpower in pretty extreme scenarios, right? Because you're trying to force your body to a place it doesn't want to go. How important was willpower? Or is it a bit of a distraction and actually you don't want to be drawing down on willpower?
I saw it as willpower had a set amount, like a bucket of it. And so I did everything I possibly could to remove willpower from the equation. And that sounds like really quite anorak things of making sure all my kit was ready, dry, warm cycling shoes by the door, bike ready to go. So there was no excuses to not get out the door and do the training I needed to do. Living somewhere where there was quiet roads and trails to run on, having great people to train with, so that would motivate me to get out the door rather than having to use willpower. And I think that's a mistake lots of people make when they're trying to do challenges or exercise. They think it's about getting up off the sofa and using willpower to get yourself to the gym. If I was doing that 3 times a day, I'd have no chance. I'd only last a few days and then quit. When it's the really hard times, of course, yeah, sometimes you have to use willpower, a combination of willpower and actually using psychological tricks to basically lie to yourself. I'm only going to push this hard until the next corner, and then I'll ease down. And then you get to the next corner and tell yourself that only get to the next corner.
Let's talk more about the psychological tricks. How do you continue to trick yourself over days and months and years when you know you're tricking yourself?
I think it's really important to minimize the amount of time you're doing that. I think for psychological reasons, like I said, I think you've got a set amount of willpower and probably the amount you can really push yourself. And B, for physiological reasons, which is another chat in itself. Really endurance training is about doing as much volume as you can. There's a fairly set rule in exercise physiology where it's a dose-response relationship, and the more of something you do, the more adaptation you get and the better you get. So it makes sense to do as much as that as you can, as easy as you possibly can, to drive those same adaptations. So for those two reasons, the number of times in a normal week, even though I'm doing a massive amount of training, I'm really pushing myself, is quite slim. And again, I try and remove me pushing it from the equation. So rather than going out and cycling on or running on a treadmill and thinking this is awful, all I've got to focus on is how painful this is. I would go and do a session that turned into a competitive session with a bunch of friends, and it'd be competitive and fun. Of course, there were times where I was feeling bad and I really had to push myself hard. And I developed different tricks for doing that. I think one of those is insane levels of focus. And I remember from a very young age teaching myself on a hill on a bike, or whether that's running behind someone. There's nothing that matters in this world that the point in front of me on that person's bike. All it matters is that doesn't get further away. That's the only thing that matters. Complete singular focus on that. And and then telling yourself, it'll only matter for the next minute, and then it'll slow down and keep tricking yourself.
Hearing those stories makes it very visceral, and I think it's probably very helpful to our listeners. But trying to sort of maybe summarize what you've just said there, it sounds like kind of remove as many decisions from the process, kind of build an environment around yourself that is sort of conducive to the goals you want to reach. And then this sort of psychological, I don't want to call them tricks, because I think that's not fair necessarily to what they provide, but really kind of leveraging your psychology to drive yourself forward.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary. I always saw it as removing barriers, and I think that's it applies to all of life. The barriers that get in the way for you doing the kind of things that you need to be able to do. How do you remove those? And when I wrote a book and I spoke to loads of different high performers on this subject, the one thing I realized is actually it doesn't matter what motivates people or gets you out the metaphorical door to go training. The important thing is that they all knew what they needed to do that day to get through the training or the activity. And there's lots of different ways of doing it, but in a kind of a metacognition type of way, the best performers just understand how they need to approach it.
Amazing. Well, let's put this into practice. We're in the Christmas season. The New Year's coming around the corner. It's time when many people set their fitness goals. How should some of our listeners think about trying to really achieve those goals that they set?
Yeah, so number one, set a goal that inspires you. And that's what's kept me going for so long. It needs to get you out of bed in the morning. Number two, how can you remove as many barriers as possible from doing what you need to do? So if it's training, if you're going running, make sure you've got good kit and ready to go. Choose something that is an easy exercise to do. Don't want to do an ultra run in the desert and train for it in Scotland, because it's going to be quite difficult to do. So that's another barrier. And three, make it social and motivational. I'm fascinated about finding ways to inspire and motivate more people to be more active. It's a really difficult piece of the puzzle. But one of the big answers to that is the social aspect. It sets a line in the sand. You're not going to let your mates down if you're going to go meet them for that training session, and it motivates you to get out the door.
And how, if they're struggling with some of those goals, how do you think they can improve their mental toughness?
Well, I think mental toughness needs to play a smaller role in those goals as you possibly can. So, without laboring the point, do everything you possibly can to remove that. And then, when you do require mental toughness, I think you've got to get a lot of satisfaction from that. It sounds very cliched that you have to enjoy the process to an extent, but it's really true. And, as long as you can sit down afterwards and say to yourself, I achieved something today, as small as it might be, enjoy that achievement. And I always tell everyone, I like to say, you always got to remember that first step out the door is the hardest. And it's very true. And you never, ever regret it. So, just get going. If nothing else, just make the first move.
Okay. Do you think New Year's resolutions are a good idea?
I think anything that motivates people to achieve what they want to achieve is good. It doesn't matter whether you do that on January the 1st or October the 1st. Ultimately, you can always you can always start somewhere, and starting is always a good thing. And any level of movement in this day and age, it doesn't have to be a crazy sporting goal. Any level of movement is a good thing for us all.
Do you make New Year's resolutions yourself?
I don't think I've ever actually made a New Year's resolution, but for me, kind of in a funny the triathlon season normally comes through to the end of the year, and then as New Year ticks round, it's really kind of ramping it up. So kind of technically no, but in lots of ways, that's when training gets going.
Was there a moment when you decided I'm going to be an Olympic champion?
I love to tell the anecdote that I was training very hard and at school, and as a 17-year-old in 2005, I was walking down the corridor in school, and a teacher said, "London's won the bid. Have you seen Brownlee? London's won the bid to host the Olympic Games." I said, "No, I've been in maths or something." And I remember very clearly at the time it felt that was like really cool, but it was irrelevant to me. I was never going to be good enough to be there. And then fast forward a couple of years, I got a bit better, and I was studying medicine in Cambridge, and I had a very clear decision to make. That's 2007, the Olympics the year after. I was kind of getting good enough, but couldn't balance the studying and the training, and I wanted to go to the Olympics, and the path that opened up for me. And at that point, so I say that point when I decided to drop out of studying and focus on being a professional athlete. And that's 18 years ago, literally half my life ago. And I've spent the last 18 years as a professional athlete.
We're now going to shift gears a bit to the moment that you are apparently sick of talking about. The moment in the World Championship when you carried your brother, Jonny, who was suffering from exhaustion, over the finish line. And as a result, you took bronze and he took silver. It's an incredible moment to watch. I think I remember when I watched it, it was almost a decade or 15 years ago, and started sending it around to people. I think I was sort of crying a little bit when I watched it, because it's a real moment of fraternal love. And I think it says a lot about you as a human being. Tell us about that moment from your perspective.
So to give the context, it was in 2016. The Olympics had been a few weeks before, would come first and second, and we're at the race, the final of the World Series in Mexico, and Jonny's about to win the world title. He's up the road in first. I'm battling with a South African to come second, and I'm already thinking this is the perfect end to the year. I'm going to cross the line. Jonny's won the World Championship. I've won the Olympics. I can't wait for my cold beer at this Mexican holiday resort we're at. And I get around the last corner and just see Jonny slumped into the official. And I just know straight away it's basically he's overheated. And in literally a split second decision, I drag him, carry him, and start dragging him towards the finish line. Somewhere in that process, a few hundred meters later, I start thinking, Jonny still could be world champion here if I get him across the finish line before we get caught. So I start looking behind and push him across the finish line. Then firstly, he obviously was whisked straight off to intensive care. He was unconscious, and it's bad. Some of the other athletes were that was amazing. Someone like, what have you done? And my poor parents are at home, and I'm trying to get through to them just to make sure it's okay. I ring my mum, and she picks up the phone, and she's like, what have you done to your brother? What
a mum response.
Exactly,
your fault.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was strange, because I went to bed that night thinking, because we nearly got disqualified for it. I had to stand up in front of the competition jury, and
how come?
Well, because they weren't sure if I was aiding and abetting another athlete. There's loads of things around kind of aiding athletes and potential kind of match fixing. They have tightened up the rules, actually. So now if you did do it, you'd be disqualified. But yeah, just crazy. And to your point, the kind of impact it had really surprised me, because I just thought it was, firstly, we'd failed because Jonny was trying to win a world title. Secondly, it's kind of, dodgy with the rules, and that's not somewhere you want to be as an athlete. So I went to bed that night kind of feeling a bit down about it. And yeah, the impact was crazy. And it took me a long time to understand what that was about, really, because to me it was a kind of failure. And as someone who's very analytical and thinks a lot about how and why they make performance decisions, I like that to be analytical and objective. And I couldn't really work out why I made that decision and why it had an impact. And ultimately it was because I didn't have a chance to make that decision. It was an automated, subconscious decision made in the split second when there's massive amounts of fatigue, that I think it showed it was just a very human moment.
Very
I think
selfless.
people picked up on it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how you both got there. So 2 brothers from Yorkshire become Olympic gold medalists, both of you. How did it happen?
This fantastic. We could spend hours talking about the nature-nurture argument on this question. I think it's both. We obviously there is some level of genetics that are important. Parents that were active, and mum who was a swimmer, and a dad who was a runner, and living in the right place, surrounded by other people who were exercising and training with great clubs and friends. So the environment in that sense is really important. But I think potentially more important was the kind of parent psychological environment. Never like pushy, in sport, probably a lot more pushy in our academics, to be honest. Very supportive, and just a kind of feeling and sense that, it doesn't matter what you do, just make sure you do it as well as you possibly can do.
Who was the driving force there? Who was the main person in the Brownlee household who you would put it down to in terms of really pushing? Was it you pushing your brother? Was it your parents, one of your parents pushing both of you?
So I think I was the one who was pushing, super determined, driven, and I would push that way. But that definitely came from having parents who were like, do things well, and we'll support you in whatever way we can. And looking back on it, 2 parents who were doctors who, for years and years were taking us to swim sessions before school, running sessions after school, races at weekends, like absolutely incredible. I don't know how they did it. So that facilitation for us to do it, might have very much came from me. And I remember all the time being told, don't do it if it's, don't push yourself too hard. Don't do it if it stresses you out. But, never ever, I don't think they ever said, if I said I want to do this race or want to do this extra training session, never said, well, no, we're not taking you to do that.
So we've been watching the Barrett brothers play for the All Blacks in the Autumn Internationals, 3 brothers in one amazing All Black team. I remember growing up watching Steve Waugh and Mark Waugh play cricket for Australia. Why are there so many siblings in elite sport?
Again, it's the nature-nurture argument, and truthfully, it's both. How much each of those comes into play, we'll never know. And yeah, I think it is. If you have the right genetics, the right environment, and that part of that environment is, of course, each other. Jonny and I had the other best person in the world to train and push each other on every day. No one has that in triathlon across 3 sports. So, but we learned very early on that you can't push each other and race each other every day. But when you do want to push each other on, that's a real advantage and a kind of superpower to have. And yeah, we would certain training sessions a week. So out of the 18 or 20 sessions you're doing a week, 3 or 4 of those are key sessions, and they're the ones where the kind of gloves could come off and you could go at each other.
So it's probably like a combination of just exceptional genetics and then a healthy competition between
healthy
siblings.
Rivalry. Yeah. And I think quite often the environmental factors are understated. And by that, it can mean anything from where you live, the sense in the environment, like I said, having really supportive parents, amazing at facilitation, but with the sense of just do things well. You're probably living healthily, foods. Really, really active. My mum was always keen on getting us to do things, being active, enjoying the outdoors. I think all those little things from a nurture environment come into play somehow.
I'm one of 3 brothers, so I find this fascinating. So there's another Brownlee brother, right? Why did he not go down the same path? And do you think he obviously missed out on all the glory, but fundamentally maybe Is he a happier, more relaxed person? How would you describe all of that with the third brother?
Yeah, a fascinating question, isn't it? I think whereas Jonny and me are 2 years apart, Ed's nearly 8 years younger than me. So like a slightly different, I guess, generation. Jonny and me did everything together. I think from a young age, poor Ed was probably dragged to those swimming sessions, and maybe he was a bit sick of it. There was definitely a genetically talented, and just decided that he didn't really want to do it. But yeah, I think fundamentally has lived a lot more kind of, maybe relaxed is the wrong word, but yeah, more a slower life. He's a vet, and absolutely loves his job, and is kind of very happy in a different way.
Amazing. Well, continuing with the sports analogy, Tommy and I actually originally met playing rugby back in our teen years, and I think we both feel strongly that there's a lot we can learn in business from the kind of elite mentality that the top sportsmen have. And we were actually lucky enough to have Benjamin Kaiser, the former French prop, give us an overview of that last week at the Giant offsite. But you're now an investor, both in Giant and in startups. So what are you looking for in the founders that you back, and what do you think they could take from the elite performance lessons of sport?
Yeah, well, I definitely wouldn't say I'm an expert on investing to the level that you guys are, but I do fundamentally feel investing in early stage businesses is people driven. You're trying to back exceptional people that, because it's an odds game, and the odds aren't in your favor. And I think that the one thing that does put it more in your favor is exceptional people. And I think that's very similar in sport. You're trying to back exceptional people, actually, whether that's the athletes who are in the field of play, or whether it's the people around you. And that's, from an athlete's point of view, that's really important. The people that you choose to trust don't have just your career in their hands. It's your career, it's your dreams, it's your passion, it's your health. So it is about picking people. But yeah, more kind of from a broader sense in startups, what can those people learn from sport? I think performance is ultimately a game of consistency. So what can you do to make yourself consistent? And by that, a consistent work output over a period of time. Performance is again about removing the barriers. Talked about a bit about that already. So do people have a good sense of that? And about great leadership. And that's just to say three things quickly and obviously, but yeah, similarly in sport. I think in sport, just quickly to delve a little bit deeper on that, it's very similar in the way that, for me, I'm an individual athlete. Really, it's about me getting the glory, crossing the line, a incredibly selfish, profession. And you have to find a way of bringing people with you on that journey to support you in your selfish goals. And how do you motivate people to come on that journey with you when for you it's a 24-hour-a-day passion? And how does someone have the same kind of output and motivation to work with you? Maybe not quite on that level, but on a similar level. And that's very similar, I think, for a startup.
Are there any shared characteristics across top athletes and founders in terms of psychology?
I think there's lots of shared characteristics. Those ones, the ones I just mentioned, ability to be consistent over lots. And by consistent, I don't mean, go and work 12 hours a day. I mean, just a consistent approach to life. Can you deal with the highs and deal with the lows, without too much of a variance in your approach? I think that's really important. Some people call it resilience. There's loads of great quotes in sport from that. Roger Federer has just been really famous from one of his retirement speeches talking about, he might be the greatest tennis player ever, but he lost, I think, slightly higher percentage of points. I spoke to a champion jump jockey for my book, AP McCoy, and he's the winning stats of 4,500 races, I think. And he says, it's great, but I lost a lot more and ended up in the ambulance plenty of times as well. So that form of resilience, I think, is important. And I think the approach to leadership is good. And also at the right times, a relentless focus. So being able to, at the right times, being able to really relentlessly focus on one task.
Alistair, I remember watching a documentary about you guys, you and your brother, over my wife's shoulder. And I think I'm not imagining this. I think there was an interview with your swimming coach, school swimming coach. And he was remembering watching this little kid just kind of exhaust himself in the swimming pool, trying to pull you out of the pool and saying, this is not good. You're pushing too hard. And you jump back up and go, I'm not going to win the Olympic medal if I'm going to give up now. And that's not normal for a kid. Do you think your success is down to just a completely outsized level of drive and ambition, not just compared to normal people, but actually compared to your competitors? Ultimately, is that why you won?
I think there's many reasons why you can make it to the top of a sport. Plenty of reasons that are outside your control. Genetics, being in the right place, to a certain extent, meeting the right people, actually finding the right sport. Doesn't matter if I decided to throw all that drive into being the best 100-meter sprinter in the world, I was never going to win an Olympic gold medal at 100-meter sprinting. But yeah, drive is really, really important. And people can have that drive for lots of different reasons. If you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said it needs to be a really innate, strong, personal drive to achieve whatever that goal. I actually don't believe that anymore. People can find the motivation for that drive in all kinds of ways. But yeah, for sure, you need to be driven. You need to be selfishly driven as well. You need to be able to say no to a bunch of things and put your sporting goals above pretty much everything else in life around you, and everyone else's life around you most of the time. It's, relentlessly selfish.
I think that point you make about picking the right thing that you can be world-class at is really relevant also for entrepreneurs. We talk a lot on the show with entrepreneurs who talk about the aiming phase, figuring out what is the right company that you as an entrepreneur can build and getting the right founder market fit. I think it's very similar with what you're saying about, if you went for the 100 meters, it would never going to work.
It is, yeah. I'd never thought about it like that, but it's a really good point. It definitely is. And yeah, but that's why, one of the other things I do with the Brownlee Foundation, just getting kids into sport, I fundamentally believe that it's just giving young people the opportunity, even actually not for them trying to be world class at this point, but if you can give, and we do give this year, 15,000 kids their opportunity to do a triathlon. If 500 of those want to do a bit more swimming, they've found their passion for swimming, or 200 want to do more triathlon, great. And yeah, I think it's maybe they're both linked. First finding the thing that inspires and motivates you, and then finding the thing that you're good at. They're probably linked to some extent. Yeah. But yeah, both very important.
And when did you start the Brownlee Foundation?
We started it in 2014, I think. So it's 10 years old now. And yeah, we've had over 70,000 children do their first triathlon with us, along with many other things. We donate equipment, bikes, helmets, and storage equipment to schools in need and things like that.
Incredible. So important to get kids moving like that. So you've had one of the most extraordinary careers in sport. Now looking ahead, you've chosen to hang up your boots as of, I believe, yesterday was the formal announcement. So what led you to that decision?
Well, as I said, I'm 36. I've been a professional.
Oh, that's young. That's young.
It's not in sporting terms.
Tell us, please.
I feel like I've had a hard paper round, put a lot of miles on those legs. So I've been doing it a long time. It has got a lot harder, and I can't do the training that I used to do. Yeah, it's got a lot harder, I think, over the last few years. But most importantly, I'm just excited to do other things. I think if there's two driving things that kind of not forced the decision, but swung the decision that way rather than to carry on. One was I don't want to be at the point where my body's so kind of past it, I can't do other things for fun, stay active, be able to do ultra races and exercise, just be out in the mountains and doing stuff for fun. And the second thing is I've got so many other exciting and motivating things I can do. I'm really happy to have a change in kind of direction.
Alistair, maybe you can just talk us through the actual thinking process behind that decision to retire, because I think listeners can learn a lot. Not everyone has this momentous day where their sports career comes to an end, but all of us think about our life in chapters, and you decide to move on from one chapter and go on to the next. Did you approach that with the same kind of rigor that you approach a lot of your training? Did you really think in a very detailed, objective way about it, or was it more of an emotional decision?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to sit here and say, yeah, there was a fixed process. I wrote a long list of pros and cons. It was a very analytical decision, which I've been saying is how I make most decisions, and that's true. But if I was to give one answer why, it would be, it just feels right. And as you're asking that question, I think that means it has been a very emotional decision. But I think it has happened over the last couple of years at least. So, within that time, I've gone through it with a fair amount of rigor. If I was to carry on, can it, what would happen? And to give an example, I guess, I try to think everything in kind of probabilistic kind of terms. The one thing that I found really hard over the last few years is the unpredictability in my body in terms of injury and illness. So, if I could I was thinking if, I dedicate 3 months of my life to one race, if the chances are that I'm not going to get ill or injured in that time through some freak thing, if there's a 90% chance that I'm going to be good, I'd probably carry on. But that chance isn't 90%, for example. It's probably more like 50-50 now. So it just feels really hard to dedicate all that time, effort, and energy into something where there's such a high chance that something can go wrong.
If you talk to a lot of the top elite athletes, they'll say actually staying injury-free is probably the most important thing to being a world-class athlete over time. Would you agree with that? How important is staying injury-free, not just for elite athletes, but also for all of our listeners trying to stay fit? What's more important, really pushing yourself or pushing yourself a little bit less to make sure you're injury-free?
100% pushing yourself a little bit less. Whether actually you're training to be the best in the world or you're just training to be healthy, the same thing holds. Consistency is key. Massive cliche, but it's so true. But again, because physiologically, if you boil down all of the kind of scientific knowledge, it's dose response. And if you can accumulate, the way you accumulate hours of exercise over a period of time is not to do 50 hours one week and none the next. It's to consistently do the amount of hours you can maintain in all of those weeks. And that absolutely applies whether you're just trying to, you're training and being active for health, and to maximize your cardiovascular ability to stay healthy, live healthy lives, longevity, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same thing. Or you're trying to be the very best.
It does seem there's a sort of physiological cap for elite athletic performance, because whether it's Federer or Tom Brady, everyone sort of says, I'm going to play well into my 30s, even my 40s. They're often saying that sort of in the end of their 20s, early 30s. And then they get to the wrong side of 35. And it does seem like there's just something gives.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's an age, and I think it's different for different sports. That's a power-based sport or whatever it might be, and different for different people. Depends what your kind of mechanical weaknesses are. It probably makes more sense that it's a load thing over a period of time. So you've done I started training very hard from being quite young, and so probably brought forward a kind of athletic kind of career in some ways. If I'd started training more in my mid-20s, maybe I'd still be going a bit more. I don't know. But yeah, it definitely gets harder. I think probably mentally as well. Can you keep making those, as we talked about earlier, sacrifices?
Mm-hmm.
Most athletes say to you, when it's time to retire. You'll just know. And then you get a few people who really just don't want to retire. So Jimmy Anderson, the great England fast bowler, he really just didn't want to retire. Kind of amazing athlete going into, I think, the age of 40, bowling at the elite level, and was retired because he wasn't willing to retire himself. How do you feel today, day after you announced the retirement? Does it feel bittersweet? Do you feel emotional about it? Or are you just looking to the future?
Yeah, I think I'm lucky that I knew it was time to retire. I've made this decision slowly over a long period of time. And I made the announcement yesterday, but I'd really decided probably a little bit before that. I actually raced the last race I did last weekend in the T100 World Series final in Dubai and came third, and that was a good result. And so a lot of people said, is it making you reconsider? And I was like, absolutely not. Actually, I'm really happy with the decision, and ending on a good race, I think, is the best thing that could happen. So yeah, I think that says a lot.
Phenomenal to say goodbye on your terms. What's next for Alistair Brownlee?
Well, at the moment, some good holidays and a bit of a rest. Yeah,
put the feet up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I really want to. I'm going to stay active, and there's a whole load of kind of challenges that I've wanted to do, but never really had the chance to do. So kind of ultra running, ultra biking, gravel bike racing, mountain bike racing, all kinds of things. Well, I've been focused on elite sport because it doesn't give you the time and opportunity to do stuff like that. So a bunch of things like that. And then, a bunch of other exciting projects to get stuck into that, got some really cool things going on that I'm really looking forward to and be able to kind of talk a bit more about in the coming months.
Well, you've inspired a lot of people. You've given a lot of people a lot of joy. When I was on the way here, my cabbie was almost welling up talking about your 2012 win. So thank you on behalf of the nation for doing that for so many years. And we're really excited about working with you on our companies. We love having you as an angel investor in some of the companies and coaching the CEOs to be better elite performers. So long may that continue. Thank you so much for coming on the show,
Thank you,
Alistair.
Alistair. That's
Pleasure.
fantastic.
Thank you.